Hello and welcome to our webinar, which will look today at best practices that organizations can implement to optimize their AI governance processes. My name is Mark McCord. I'm the editor of Data Management Insight here at A-Team Group, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to share some events we have coming up in the next couple of weeks. You can see them at the bottom of your page. You can register to attend Data Management Summit New York City, our Showcase DMI event in the US, and that will take place next week on September the 18th. Best approaches for trade and transaction reporting will be the title of our webinar on September the 11th. And a little while after that, how to organize, integrate, and structure data for successful AI will be a webinar for that date, September 25th. Today's webinar will focus on modern data platforms, and to discuss this and much else besides, we have our guest speakers. There's Gaston Hamel from Precisely, Nicole Hansen from NatWest Group, and Jovita Tam, a business-focused data and AI advisor and attorney who replaces our previously advertised participants. I'll ask them all to introduce themselves fully in a moment, but first, let me introduce you all to Slido, the audience participation app we'll be using today. On the right of your screens, you'll see two panels during this webinar. One is for audience polls, of which we'll be running 3 today, and I'll let you know when they're coming up. Please do take part in them so we can gauge your interest in the topic we're talking about today. There will also be a panel for your pressing questions and for you where you can type those in whenever you like. We'll take a break during proceedings to answer as many as we can. So let's go to our speakers. And Gaston, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your interest in this topic.
Thank you, Mark. My name's Gaston Hummel. I'm the Mayor Lead for Data Strategy Services at Precisely. That basically means that I help our clients with a set of leading practices that have been proven across many organizations to set up their data programs and more set up their AI initiatives for success too.
Thank you very much. Jovita, please, can you tell us more about yourself?
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm a business-focused data and AI advisor, engineer, and dual qualified attorney in both New York and England and Wales. I guide forward-thinking companies through responsible digital transformation, and I help them navigate AI adoption and AI product development. I've worked with clients ranging from startups to Fortune 100 companies globally.
Thank you very much. And Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hansen. I'm a program manager at NatWest Group, specializing in commercial and institutional regulatory transformations. I've most recently worked within conduct and compliance, but most of my background is in risk and law. My interest in AI really comes from the application for our infrastructure, but also workplace transformation.
Excellent. So those are our experts. Now, let's go into some questions, but we'll start with a panel question for the audience. Poll question. This one you'll see on your screen. How far into your AI governance framework is your organization? And there are four multiple choice answers you can offer. But first off, Jovita, before you address those responses, Jovita, can you tell us in what parts of their operations and workflows do you find organizations are most wanting to deploy AI?
Sure. I think it varies a lot depending on where the organization is in terms of the AI value chain. For organizations where they've developed a, kind of AI products or products where they've incorporated AI features, I would say, the sales team are very eager to get those onto the market and into the hands of clients. And for organizations where they're looking mostly for AI to increase productivity internally, I do see a lot, of course, outside of Copilot or, that type of deployment, I see it a lot more in RevOps. So it's mostly with the goal to reduce cost in obtaining revenue.
Okay. Nicole, any thoughts? Where do you see organizations most wanting to deploy AI?
Yeah, similarly to Juvita, I also see in internal operations and workflow automations because of the benefits in terms of reduced costs and improve colleague experience, but also adherence to our regulatory obligations. We're seeing a lot of investment there, and that's also partly about bringing colleagues along the journey for AI, but also in terms of customer experience transformation, and in my space, particularly risk management and fraud prevention, where we see huge benefits for scalable solutions that identify suspicious activities and improve our monitoring against financial crime.
Gotcha. Right. Okay, let's see if the poll question results are in and have a look at the answers. It seems to be, well, so far it's an even tie. AI governance frameworks have been moderately established, and equal number of respondents say they're still thinking about it. Nicole, what does that say to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. I think that most the stats that I saw were that around 78% of organizations deploy at least one AI solution in their business functions. I see it's changing in front of me. And then we're seeing, yeah, there's huge, I suppose what Jovita was saying about this huge variation in where people are on their AI journey. But the majority here clearly are either deep into it or moderate established.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting. I will say that NatWest came 16th out of 50 major banks in last year's survey. So I'm hoping this year with our partnerships we'll be rising up the ranks.
Yeah, well, good luck. Okay, next question. What are the chief considerations that should be borne in mind before drawing up an AI framework? And Gaston, can we get your thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. There's three key areas of focus, really. They are transparency, relevance for all, and metrics. So it's important when you're drawing up a framework that you're not having AI initiatives going on as kind of skunkworks projects all over the organization where no one really knows what's really going on. So that's the transparency piece. Making it relevant for all really means that you have a framework where you can navigate what we call top down, middle out, and bottom up. So that means if you're an executive interested in a particular goal or objective for the organization, you should be able to look at the metrics by which the objective is being measured and then navigate on down to see, well, which AI initiatives are likely to be impacting this metric and how, and then on down further to see, well, what data am I going to need for this AI initiative? Middle out, meaning that if you're someone responsible for an AI initiative, you keep clear visibility of the overarching metric that that initiative should be impacting and how. And you also have clear visibility down into, well, what data are you going to be needing to succeed with this initiative? And bottom up, meaning that if you're a data engineer, data specialist, you get insight navigating up into, let's say, the AI initiatives that depend on your data, and then further up to be able to understand, well, which overarching metrics and objectives and goals of the organization are we trying to impact here? Maybe three other points to just touch on very briefly would be think about having a continuous improvement process as part of the framework from the outset, because you're not going to get it right first time, and you want a structured way, and again, a transparent way of continuously measuring and improving. You want the framework to be dry, so meaning don't repeat yourself. Ideally, every piece of information should be defined only once and not in 20 different Excel sheets. And then finally, it's important to start operationalizing your policies earlier. It's not good enough just to say this responsible AI policy is relevant to this AI use case. You should really give the highlights of how is it relevant. So, for example, in this use case, we're not allowed to use personalized, personally identifiable information because this policy doesn't accept it, so that people can see in a glance what they are and what they're not allowed to do to operationalize and bring into production their various use cases.
Right. Yeah, comprehensive answer. Nicole, is there anything else you think would benefit the consideration of the team?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree on the adaptability point. It's crucial that we also look to our existing frameworks and understand how AI links in with all those existing ones. I know the Bank of England have called out specifically to look at our existing model governance that we can see where we need to build on. And for me particularly, I'm interested in making sure that we understand our current landscape so that we really can identify the areas where there will be pressure from the introduction of AI, given the strategy considerations that Gaston mentioned.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Those are the considerations, but there are challenges as well, Jovita. What challenges do you see institutions facing, the most pressing ones when they institute an AI framework?
I see two different things. The first thing is weak data governance foundations, and they want to leapfrog to AI. So data is often unstructured, it's siloed, and then there are qualities and consistency issues. But they really want to kind of rush right into doing AI. So that's one of them. The other one is as in a majority of the cases, data weren't really collected for the purpose of the current AI use cases that they're now considering, right? So you run into issues like, bias and representativeness, or, privacy and other concerns. So those are my top two, I think.
Okay. Nicole, have you encountered any challenges that your colleagues have had to take consideration of?
I do think it comes back down to where you are in your data journey. So really making sure that you already have a data framework that you can apply. But also one of the specific considerations for us is how we think about, and actually it goes on to a separate question, about data quality and metrics, how we report them really at the type of regularity that we expect to be able to do for AI, both before we make a decision for a business case, but also at deployment and then for continuous monitoring.
Okay, well, I think we'll talk about data quality quite a lot in this. Thank you, Nicole. So where should organizations start when they begin to build their AI governance policies? And what stage of implementation should they begin? Gaston, any thoughts?
That's really the sooner the better. So right from the outset, before you even start experimenting with AI, you should really have an overarching policy of what does responsible AI mean for the organization. And it's true to say that there's essentially overarching principles that basically need to be met. So AI use cases, they need to be transparent. So that doesn't just mean within the organization, but also to external stakeholders and customers. Organizations should be able to be transparent about how they're using AI. They also need to be fair. So there must never be bias in any of the use cases or models. And it's always one thing to have a policy saying, okay, responsible AI for us means that we're being transparent about how we're using AI and that we're being fair, we're not discriminating. But it's also very important to start defining how you're actually going to measure this, how you're actually going to measure bias, and not just how are you going to measure it, but where are you going to measure it? You generally shouldn't just be measuring it in the training data, but also really in the end-to-end model pipeline. And then, documentation is of course critical. So if you're training and tuning foundation models, you need to document what training data you're using, and beyond training data, the validation data too. So what validation data you're using to test that your models are behaving the way you're expecting them to, and that you then also monitor how you can improve them over time.
Thank you. We talk about AI governance frameworks quite a lot, but how do they differ from other data frameworks? And could existing governance structures simply be modified to accommodate them? Gaston.
So there's much in common, and some data governance frameworks are based on a flexible meta model, which means they're going to be easy to extend. So generally, anything you do by way of AI governance or data governance should really be aligned with business outcomes. So a key principle of our leading practice data governance framework is really that at the top you have the overarching organization's goals, the objectives contributing to those goals, and the metrics by which the objectives are going to be measured. Now that's the same for AI governance. You want those three things at the top as well. But then the metrics really start to expand, because previously you were interested in metrics across a business impact, performance and value, efficiency and effectiveness, and also interested in how is data quality of my critical data impacting top-level metrics and objectives. But in the area of metrics, there's getting new metrics that you need to start considering, namely, well, what bias exists in my data, particularly my training and tuning data. And if I'm using a subset of my total data for training and tuning, how representative is this of my overall data? And what are acceptable bandwidths for me for this? So at the top, it's fairly similar. For metrics, there's a few additional metrics. We come down a little bit where we look at, the middle kind of business assets where you typically have, business processes, key dashboards. We have a few new assets that we need to think about governing. For example, the AI use cases and AI models. And particularly for high-risk use cases, the AI Act is very specific about much of the metadata that you require capturing and documenting and democratizing on that. From a data management perspective, key things that are important are the provenance of the data. Where's it come from? How's it been transformed? Is it available? Is it of good quality? Again, is it representative? And what bias exists in it? So things you should have been doing anyway for your critical data, but it becomes even more important, particularly for high-risk AI use cases. And again, the commonality in both, or another commonality in both, is the requirement for this continuous improvement framework to be able to continuously, measure data quality, but also error rates in your AI outputs and a structured process for, assigning responsibilities for fixing these and being transparent about, what errors are occurring, being able to report them if required for high-risk use cases, but also just making sure they're being fixed in an efficient manner.
Thank you, Gaston. Let's go. I have another poll question. Gauge the responses of our audience with another question. Who is primarily responsible for AI governance in your organization? And again, there's a multiple choice list of answers for you. While our audience is digesting those, let's go to Javita. How can governance frameworks be designed to protect sensitive proprietary data while still enabling AI innovation?
So personally, I feel that the core responsibility should lie with the data governance framework, focusing on rules, roles, and control for how data is classified, accessed, shared, and protected across the life cycle. And where AI governance comes in would be as an extension because it does introduce new data exposure risk. So the additional layer could be things like training safeguards, right? Data minimization, prohibiting the use of raw identifiers, model evaluation, leakage testing, red teaming, things like that. And then deployment rules, so kind of monitoring prompts, responses. And this is something that I always advocate for when it comes to AI governance, is that it's important to get procurement involved. So having strict vendor contracts, technical controls is very important. And of course, having oversight and accountability. So having a kill switch if there's data, leakage, for example. And one thing that I do want to kind of bring attention to is I get asked this question or similar questions like this a lot, right? Seemingly, the setup is that there seems to be an opposition force between AI governance and innovation. But I believe that that really is a misconception because I believe that governance can be an enabler. And I sometimes really wonder, and here I'm going to wonder out loud, like, is it really better to have AI systems and models which are irresponsible, unfair, biased, and not transparent, right? And having unchecked risk, which causes harm for organizations to lose money. I think when I frame it like that, then most people are like, no, it makes sense naturally to have AI governance and to have responsible AI. So, I think that AI governance in a nutshell enables innovation.
Right, yeah. Gaston, how can governance frameworks be designed to protect sensitive data?
Data classification and data provenance are obviously key requirements. Provenance meaning you need to know where the data has come from and therefore how you are allowed to use it. Now, if through the classification you have PII data and you're looking to use that in your AI tuning or training, then it's critical to protect the privacy of individuals. If you're using sensitive personal information, such as race, for example, in the training, then it's critical to be sure and take measures to avoid bias from creeping into your AI models, in particular for high-risk AI use cases. Now, there are solutions to automatically classify data with privacy and security classifications. And for each classification, an organization should really have policies in place, operationalized policies for the handling of data of each classification. So, how should it be stored? Under what conditions may it be shared? When should it be deleted? If it is being shared, then how should it be transferred to the person that's being shared or the organization it's being shared with? And what data protection measures are being taken there?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. Gaston, while we've got you, let's look at the poll results and see how our audience has voted. So responsibility is shared across multiple departments. Do you see that as a quite common in your experience?
Yes, with a key caveat. I think it's critical that the kind of overarching AI agenda is going to be set by the senior executive leadership team. So they should really, if you like, authorize and direct two teams underneath them in the area of AI. When I say authorize, first of all, that they're giving them direction or authorizing them to do the work that I'm just about to describe, and direct them by way of saying, these are the top level objectives that we want to figure out how AI can help us improve them and move them in the right direction. Now, the two teams that kind of sit up underneath the ELT for AI should be kind of a combination of a data governance team, but also very much an overarching, let's call it an overarching cross-functional AI excellence steering team to ensure that there's representation from risk, compliance, IT, and also from different business units. And that way, you kind of have a very structured approach, and then use cases from different business units and business domains, they can be fed up into this AI excellence steering team, and representatives from the business units can be on them. And then you can work on the AI initiative, if you like, okay, so which metric that we need to work on for which objective will this impact, how will it impact it, and then start documenting in a central place. Well, what data are we going to need to be successful with this use case? Where is the data? What criteria needs to be met by the data? How fit for purpose is it today, etc. And the key with this is, again, the transparency and the sharing or democratization of these use cases and how they're being worked on by this cross-functional AI steering team, so the whole organization has visibility on what we're doing in the area of AI, why, what metrics, and what criteria needs to be met to make sure our data is fit for purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it touches on one of our next questions, which is how should governance be owned? We see there that it's shared amongst most of our or a large proportion of our audience there. But what are the benefits of one or the other, Jovita? I mean, should it be within the data team or compliance or other?
I think for me, from what I've seen my clients' work, is it really varies, right? Because it depends on, again, going back to something that I've mentioned earlier in terms of where the company is in with respect to they're in their journey, in terms of the compliance maturity, as well as kind of on their AI journey, where exactly are they, right? So I think a lot of it comes down to, is there an existing structure to which it makes sense to piggyback off of, or are we starting something completely new, right? I think this is where I go back to one of my most favorite quotes, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, dinner, 2 snacks, and desserts. And each organization will find out, and for those many in this room who have led various, change and transformation initiatives in data, perhaps, and in technology, will know that there's some things within an organization that it just works, and you can't port it from one organization to another. So that will naturally determine your kind of pros and cons and what might be the most suitable.
Okay, and Jovita, you work on both sides of the Atlantic. Do you see any differences in that regard when it comes to ownership of AI governance?
Sorry, I don't Understand.
Well, is there a difference between, in the UK and then over in the US? Would there be different approaches?
I don't think the difference comes down to which side of the pond. I think the differences comes down to which type of organization. So for things like regulated industry and banks, I much more see that they would expand data governance teams to take on AI governance responsibilities. That is a much more common approach because there's strong governance framework, because there's like a team already in existing, versus like, for example, in software industry, where they may have it being that the product side or the head of like VP of AI or something will take on that responsibility because they're now developing something like that and they want to make sure the governance is in place. So I think it's less geographical and more industry business that determines the setup. At least that's my experience.
Gotcha. Okay, excellent. So we'll take a couple of audience questions soon, but first, I think we'll go on to what generally seems to be the big question within AI and the role that data quality plays. Can we look at this from the angle of data governance, AI governance? I mean, how important is good quality data? Nicole.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue, I think that good data quality is important everywhere in our organizations, but certainly, yeah, for AI governance, given the breadth of data, the scale of data, the velocity, it puts a pressure test on every weakness that you currently have within your data quality metrics and the way that you manage. And assuming that the basic goals of an AI governance policy are to ensure compliance with regulations and control operational risk, to maintain trust, and to allow your AI benefits to be realized, data quality intersects with every element of those.
Gotcha. Gaston, data quality in AI governance policies, how important is good quality?
It's absolutely critical. I mean, if data is being used to train or tune an AI model, it needs to have high quality. Otherwise, the AI model is not going to produce high quality outputs and it might hallucinate. So that basically means that data needs to be complete, accurate, up to date, have integrity, meaning you understand its provenance and how it may be used. Furthermore, of course, I mentioned earlier, it's important to understand bias and representativeness of data, but it's also important to understand where you're doing these measurements. Because suppose you're using a foundation model and you're fine-tuning that model with your own data, and you've done checks on your own data, for example, that there's no bias in your data, or the bias in your own data is within acceptable bandwidths. By the time you fine-tuned the foundation model, who's to say that that foundation model isn't introducing bias? So therefore, it's not good enough just to test bias in your own tuning or training data, but you really need to measure it end to end, probably also taking account of any post-processing that's taken place on the AI model's outputs before being released to make sure that, if you like, the full pipeline is free of bias or free of unreasonable bias.
Right, yeah. And Jovita, any further thoughts on data quality?
I do. I think, in our short conversation that we have had today, we've mentioned data quality a good number of times. So I think it's safe to say that everybody in this room recognize the importance of data quality when it comes to AI and AI governance. But what I do want to mention is that a lot of people, and Mark, you included, and sorry to single you out, would use as a shorthand to say good data quality. But something that I tend to kind of self-correct myself a lot is I would say is fit for purpose, data quality, because that actually asks us to think about what are we looking to do and what does fit for purpose looks like, right? And that's not just for AI, but for other data applications as well. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Very good, thank you. Let's move on to a couple of audience questions. I've got them on my other screen here, so I'm not looking away from you. The first one, how do you suggest we educate stakeholders across the business on their role in AI governance? And we've got you on, Jovita. What would you suggest?
So for me, I've always said that AI governance is a team sport, right? And each person is going to come in with their professional training, their experience, their roles and responsibility within an organization. So I think step one for the education is to help leading stakeholders understand AI governance from their point of view, because this is where I think for me, my multidisciplinary background comes in. I can have an AI governance conversation with like, an AI and ML engineer, have it with kind of head of sales, have it with kind of risk and compliance professional, have it with the, procurement professional or HR professional. But the conversation needs to be from that stakeholder's point of view, right? From the way they see the world, because otherwise we'll never be able to come together. So I think that it's important for us to establish a baseline so we're all working from the same definition of, what is AI like in our organization, what is our purpose and the like, but understand that each individual needs to be brought to the same starting point, but it needs to come from their professional background and experience.
Gotcha. Okay. Nicole, how do you see, what measures do you think you should take to educate stakeholders across the business on this?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging. I guess for the most part, we're really starting with this experimental phase where we have lots of AI solutions in POC stage, and we're starting to build that education through the POC stage. But the proof of the pudding will really be at the point that you wish to deploy, who is actually going to give you that rubber stamp to say that I'm comfortable, you have the right metrics, to Gaston's point, you understand the requirements and that I can continuously monitor this, that this is ready to basically to either hit our customers or our colleagues. And I think that does require a much deeper conversation. The POC piece is useful, but I think it's still a huge hurdle.
Okay. And Gaston, I mean, how do you win people over?
Well, it's about making it relevant for all. I kind of highlighted it earlier, this, top-down, middle-out, bottom-up navigation. So essentially, you ideally want to be able to show the relationships. If someone's responsible for a particular metric like customer satisfaction, if you can show them the AI use cases that are going to be impacting customer satisfaction and how, then they're obviously going to be more interested. If someone's responsible for a particular business process and there's AI use cases that are going to streamline that process, if they can understand that relationship, they're going to be, very interested. In particular, not just in the outcomes, but also what's preventing us from being able to go live with this. What issues are preventing data or the use case being fit for purpose from going live to give me these benefits for my business process, if that's what I'm responsible for. So it's really having that right framework to make it relevant for all the organization by having the right relationships between the different asset types, which could be something like a metric, CSAT metric, could be a business process, it could be someone who's responsible for a particular report, for example, and how an AI use case might bring new insights into that report, make it relevant for them too.
Right, yeah. And I guess you have to double down on that if there's any pushback.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by pushback? Sorry.
Well, if there's any sort of resistance or even doubts among different parts of the organization.
Well, that's the reason why, from an org structure, we really recommend that the authority and the direction should come from the ELT, saying, okay, well, this AI steering team is being given authority from us to bring these AI use cases to life. They're given direction from us, saying, okay, we want AI use cases to be aligned with these top level objectives. And yeah, then you're being transparent to the organization as well, particularly if you're defining, the metrics, also metrics around, bias and representativeness that training data should meet, that the organization is trying to meet, what are acceptable bandwidths for bias and how are we looking to improve these with our continuous improvement process.
Gotcha. We've got another audience question. Maybe we'll stay with you, Gaston, because you did mention the AI Act earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What emerging regulatory developments does the panel think will have the biggest impact on AI governance in the next 2 to 3 years?
So in Europe, most certainly the AI Act, it came into effect in August 24 with a 2-year implementation period. And I'd say it's the most comprehensive AI regulation globally. But yeah, interestingly, it classifies, well, many use cases that are relevant to this audience, things like AI-based credit scoring, credit assessment, and insurance pricing and risk models, all as high-risk use cases. And for high-risk use cases, the requirements and as well as the penalties for non-compliance come into effect in August 26. So that means that if you're using AI for any of these use cases before August 26, you need to have continuous monitoring and incident reporting in place. You need to have implemented transparency, which I've highlighted in most of my answers so far, and also explainability. And it's important that you can't pass this off to to partners or providers. You provide third-party oversight of your providers as well. Then it's kind of also interesting that's what's coming into effect even sooner. So is in fact just last month were the rules and penalties that started to apply for general purpose AI models. So these are if you're using LLMs, large language models, or multimodal models, there's essentially information that you have to have documented and democratized across your organization to be compliant. So that includes, technical documentation on the development, training, and evaluation of the model. You need to have transparency reports, so insights into that model explainability. What are the model's capabilities, limitations, risks? You need to have training data summaries of, what data was used, sourced from where to train or tune the model. So this is very much alive today already, and it applies to many of the top highest priority AI use cases amongst the financial services and insurance sector today already.
Okay. Nicole, do you see any other sort of regulatory measures on the horizon that could have an impact on how AI framework, the governance frameworks are put together?
No, I mean, I guess I'd also agree. Our focus on the EU AI Act is really where we're leading from, but also essentially what our customers are thinking and how they're responding to new AI tools being used. So, for example, with chatbots, because we moved from a rules-based chatbot that had low customer experience ultimately, they're quite accepted, I guess, by our use base. The generational capabilities are beneficial for them, but there's definitely nervousness about being able to understand where our clients will consider us essentially in terms of where they decide to bank, from the perspective of how far we are on our AI journey. So that reputational risk is really a huge consideration.
Right. And Jovita, I guess the regulatory picture is different on both sides of the Atlantic at the moment. How do you see that working?
So I think I would actually take a step back and go back to the starting point of what does AI governance mean to you, right? And for me, I look at it as, on one hand, you are sitting here trying to manage AI risk. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that there's responsible AI deployment in your organization and responsible use. So starting from that starting point, on one hand, you're going to have all of your responsible AI North Stars, frameworks, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, if you're looking at AI risk, you're not just looking at AI compliance risk, right? It's only a subset of it. So that would help you put it as a starting point, that would help you put into perspective of how to approach the regulatory landscape. Because as you know, some jurisdiction has AI specific laws, right? Such as the EU, but there are also many jurisdictions out there that do not. And there is a distinction between AI regulations and, for example, with data privacy. So when GDPR came out, in the legal community, people were talking about like Brussels effect, right? That became the de facto standard for everybody. And a lot of people are sitting here wondering, would the EU AI Act be the same thing? I think that the EU AI Act is definitely very strong and something that we should most definitely consider in the AI governance space. But within each jurisdiction, right, there are many different approaches. Like in Asia, like there are different countries with some voluntary frameworks. China have their own approach, so on and so forth, right? So I think if you look at it and approach it philosophically, the questions that perhaps you should be asking is based on where my company operates, right? And based on where my risk is, what makes sense as the backbone in terms of regulation for the framework, and how am I going to adapt globally to the various other jurisdictions that perhaps the company operates or the client operates. So I think because it's very fragmented, for now, we need to continue to take that approach and recognize that just because you're not breaking any AI-specific laws or not breaking any law specifically doesn't necessarily mean that you have a good AI governance program.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah, good point. Let's have a final audience poll. And this time we're going to ask, how often is your AI governance policy reviewed and updated? As always, there is a multiplicity of answers you can click on. And so if you do that while we discuss our next question, we've got a few more. How can you measure the effectiveness of an AI governance policy, and what does good look like? Nicole?
Yeah, I guess ultimately our good AI governance aligns with your fundamental expectations around fairness, security, and auditability. So in that sense, measuring effectiveness includes evaluating your regulatory compliance, your incident frequencies and risk management, transparency and explainability, stakeholder trust, the value realization, and your governance process maturity. I think it's ultimately, we see across the board that there are obviously many policies and people have policy fatigue. So it's also about that ability that people really utilize the governance policy for their decision making, are able to be able to access it and really embed it into their processes rather than it sitting outside as a interesting document that somebody reads once in a while.
Yeah, we've all been there. Gaston, what does good look like?
There's basically
And how would you
5 ways or effective ways of measuring the effectiveness of a good AI governance policy. The first would be with what we call data governance scores across critical assets for AI. So for high risk, well, for any use case, the AI Act, for example, dictates for the model what metadata, what information about the model should you be capturing. And the governance score would basically give you an indication of how complete is the metadata that I need for this model. So essentially, how complete is the information I need about my AI-related assets for them to be, well, ready. And part of that is also understanding things like responsibilities. So, do I have a clearly assigned human in the loop responsibility and end responsible person for the algorithmic output? So all of that, kind of the completeness of the information about my AI asset, is typically measured with data governance scores. Number 2 would be metrics. So business outcomes metrics, but also bias and diversity metrics, measuring these and how they're tracking. 3 would be number of incidents where bias or misaligned output happened. 4 would be effectiveness and speed of continuous improvement loop of fixing errors and continuously improving the output. And then finally, just really surveys across the organization to get a view of how broad and good is the understanding across the organization of the organization's AI use cases, their limitations, their target metrics that they're trying to impact from a business outcome perspective, but also target metrics from a compliance perspective.
Right. Comprehensive again. Jovita, what do you see as a best way to measure the success of an AI governance policy?
Well, I think since Nicole and Gaston have both mentioned a lot of metrics, I'm going to take a different approach. I think what I've seen is that in today's business world, of course, we're very eager to be able to show results because that's how we get budget, that's how we show progress, and it's all very, very important. But I also see that at the same time, there's a tendency for us to put blinders on and to go, okay, well, we have decided on these 5 core metrics, 10 core metrics or whatever, and just to look at that. So I want to take a step back and to say perhaps an effective one way to show effectiveness of AI governance policy is in people's mindset, right? If you sit here and go, people in this organization generally feels like that AI governance is the right thing to do, instead of that, okay, AI governance means AI compliance, means somebody's having a stick like coming at me and to say the only reason why we're doing this is to avoid regulatory fine. I would define that as, success.
Great stuff. Okay, let's look at the poll results and see what our audience thought of that. So, annual review and update of the AIF governance policy. Jovita, is that often enough? Too often?
I think it really depends on the organization. I think the standard in like the risk and compliance industry is annual review, and then also triggered by events, right? If there's a new regulation or something materially changes within the organization. But I think, AI and AI governance is a change journey for many, many different organizations. And this comes down to finding the right starting point, right? You may have started with an AI policy, which is a little bit more basic, meeting the organization where it is, right? But 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road, your organization has grown out of it. That would be the right time to update the policy. And I think the other part of the cadence or the timing of it also depends on your resource level, because it's not just about updating the policy. Like for me, I feel like that there's a huge go-to-market component of it, right? Letting the right people know, getting people to buy in. So the question is, you don't want to fatigue the organization by, having it being a periodical, right? Something coming out every 2 weeks. But at the same time, you want it to be a good match for your organization. And if you're in a smaller organization, you may be able to afford to roll it out a little bit like sooner. But if you're in a larger organization, you need to align with things like audit schedule, when your regulator is coming to visit you. So it depends, right? But the last thing you want is, you don't want an outdated principle or policy that your organization is being measured against.
Okay. Nicole, do you think it's important to have a regularly timetabled review of policies? As it seems
I mean, it's a minimum expectation, but I suppose it does risk this the compliance theatre, we call it, essentially. There's this appearance that you're meeting your objectives when in actual fact you're not really thinking about the value of an update, which I'd also agree is heavily linked to the market environment itself, any developments that you see. So we tend to see, but I agree, policy fatigue is such a challenge that it makes sense to keep it somewhat stable so that people don't feel that this is changing around me all the time, and that they have the time to be able to familiarize themselves with it. So really pitching your governance policy at the right level to be able to give that confidence around stability, while also being able to provide that adaptability, is really key.
Yeah. Gaston, how can AI frameworks be adapted? I mean, is it to changes in technology as well as regulations?
It's really important, as I highlighted earlier, to have this dry approach, if you like, so don't repeat yourself approach. So ideally, every piece of information that needs to be captured from an AI governance perspective should ideally only be captured in one location, and it should be visible in all related assets as well. And people should be able to, if they're interested in a particular asset, in a particular metric, for example, be able to follow it or subscribe to updates to it. Because if you're capturing, I mean, that's really the cornerstone of a successful governance program, be it data governance or AI governance. It's the strong relationships between the different assets. Because if you're going to start defining key metadata in 25 different Excel files and store all of those on SharePoint, and then try and understand, well, which AI use cases are impacting what metric and how, and what data are they depending on, what does it mean for that data to be fit for purpose, and you're going to different Excels for all of this information, it's kind of a non-starter. You can't govern in that way. You need to be able to go and see, have a single view of all the information in one place, but be able to update it in a single location as well, and receive updates on the assets that you're interested in when they change.
Okay, thank you. Right. Well, we've got 5 minutes, but about enough time for one more question. So this is one we like to ask at the end of webinars as a sort of sign off. What would be the single piece of advice you'd offer an organization embarking on their AI governance journey? Jovita, let's start with you.
This is something that Gaston has already mentioned, which is start now. But I want to add to that by saying that, take the best of your awareness and pick your starting point very, very carefully. There isn't going to be a perfect starting point of which can of worms to open, which to leave closed, but make sure you know what you're choosing and start now.
Excellent, thank you. Nicole, what would be the one piece of advice you would offer?
I guess in my experience, every successful transformation has been a people story. So for me, the key takeaway is to upskill your workforce, not just through technical training, but also building AI fluency across the organization and really allowing your workforce to utilize tools, play around with tools, and feel safe in, starting to work with AI.
Thank you. And Gaston?
I was struggling to find one. I had three, so I'm really glad that Jovita and Nicole took two of mine.
Well, we've got 5 minutes. Go through them.
So I agree, start early. I also would suggest the democratized approach so that everyone kind of, understands, well, what the organization is trying to do and achieve and why. But yeah, the third one then that hasn't been mentioned yet would really be to align AI use cases with corporate objectives from the outset and have clear metrics. So in the early life cycle of an AI use case, when you're reviewing whether to do it or not, don't just look at, oh, is this possible or not, but immediately start to think, okay, well, which overarching objective could this impact? What metrics for that objective could it impact? And start thinking about, okay, how are we going to measure this? And metrics, of course, goes a little bit further as well in terms of, measuring metrics around data quality and in particular bias as well. But yes, align with objectives from the outset, probably align with business objectives from the outset, but don't forget metrics around bias and diversity as well.
It's interesting. Neither of you mentioned the team, picking the team. Is that something that is generally accepted to, you wouldn't be able to build a decent governance framework unless you had the team anyway?
So with many of the organizations that I've worked with, that kind of leading practice approach on the data governance side is kind of in place already with the ELT giving authorization and direction to a data governance team and data excellence steering team, a cross-functional data excellence steering team. So that data excellence steering team, and well, the way they work is very similar to the AI excellence steering team in terms of identifying, well, what do we need to know, what metadata do we need, what data do we need to succeed with this, how are we going to measure the success of it, and yeah, so that kind of cross-functional team in many organizations is in place already, and it kind of comes back to the question of what's the difference between an AI governance framework and a data governance framework. There is some commonality. If you have a good data governance framework with that continuous improvement loop, then you're probably in quite a good position to apply a variation of that continuous improvement loop to your AI use cases as well.
Gotcha. Well, it feels like we've come full circle. And on that note, I'd like to thank you all for your participation. Thank you, Jovita, Nicole, and Gaston. It just leaves me to remind you of our upcoming events. So we have the Data Management Summit in New York. That's on September the 18th. And Best Approaches for Trade Transaction Reporting webinar on September the 11th. And How to Organize, Integrate, and Structure Data for Successful AI. That's a webinar on September the 25th. I'd like to thank, of course, our panel of experts, but also our sponsor, Precisely. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.